Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
And today is the day that we're supposed to remember when the war machine temporarily stopped. Today is also Wednesday, which means it's the Ask Me Anything. I'm your host, Darryl W. Perry, and unlike most Wednesdays where it's the Ask Me Anything, I'm going to change it up just a little bit today. First, allow me to welcome all of the new listeners, and yes, there will be new listeners today. How do I know that? Well, the fine folks over at IPM Nation are picking up the show. They will be running the show Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So welcome to everybody listening on IPM Nation, as well as everybody listening over at Freedom's Phalanx Radio, and anybody listening on LRN during the podcast loop, and of course the podcast listeners that are getting the show either from SoundCloud or Spreaker or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or any of the other number of various places you can find the show. And if you're not sure where all those places are, you can go to fppradio.com, and there's a handy list of various places, all of the ones that I'm aware of that you can find the show. And there are probably ones not on that list, but they're not on the list because I'm not aware. So fppradio.com is where you can find all of that information. So today is Wednesday, and I do an Ask Me Anything every Wednesday. And, well, because today is Armistice Day, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and this is also episode 250 of the show, by the way, so a quarter of the way to 1,000 episodes, and I know it's going to take a couple more years, but when it hits, it's going to seem like it was just yesterday when the show began, right? So let me start with a story from the Zero Aggression Project. It's an initiative of the Downsize DC Foundation, and I get the emails all the time, and this one came in, and it said, should we stop calling it Veterans Day? And while, yes, this is the Ask Me Anything, and they're kind of asking the question in the headline, but they then answer it in the article. But I just want to share this real quick before jumping into the questions that I have. So Veterans Day used to be called Armistice Day. Armistice Day remembered the exact moment when World War I ended, the 11th hour of the 11th month of the 11th day of 1918. Armistice Day was a valuable holiday, and it constantly reminded people of the biggest mistake that politicians ever made: a world war fought over nothing. Alas, the political class could not abide such a reminder of their folly, and so Armistice Day was eventually changed to something the politicians could exploit: Veterans Day. Whereas Armistice Day highlighted the dangers of militarism, Veterans Day has come to celebrate militarism. And this is something that I was talking about on Monday, about people believing that rights come from this blood sacrifice. And on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, those are really the 2 days out of the year to where people really celebrate this blood sacrifice, and you have to remember all of the dead people that gave you your freedom. No, I have freedom despite all of these people that have been killed and murdered and slain for the benefit of politicians. I have rights regardless of if anybody gets killed. But I digress, and I continue. Yes, Veterans Day also includes a solemn remembrance of all the young lives lost in war, but there is never any mention made of the role politicians played in squandering those lives. Instead, a big lie is propagated. We're told that soldiers died to defend freedom or to protect our way of life. Nothing could be further from the truth. We provide a link below to demonstrate that claim, and I'll post the link to this article in the show notes. You can read it at your leisure. But it goes on to say that the state, and they capitalize here at the Downsized DC Foundation, they capitalize both words of the state, and they use that term to describe the monopoly organization that claims a legitimate use of force over a geographic area. The state has murdered hundreds of millions of people during the 20th century. Many of those victims were actually murdered by soldiers, including U.S. soldiers, or they lost their lives due to the unintended consequence of U.S. foreign policy. Civilian deaths have far exceeded military deaths, but there is no holiday to memorialize them. But there should be. There absolutely should be a day to remember all of the innocent people that were killed by various militaries and various governments around the world. And I don't know how to officially make a holiday, but from henceforth, I decree that November 12th will be the day that we commemorate the innocent lives that have been lost in war. Now, join me tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do to actually celebrate, and I hope that this catches on. And I don't even know what I'm going to call this day, but tomorrow, join me in commemorating and remembering all of the lives of innocent people, men, women, and children that have been killed by various militaries and various governments around the world. So, they conclude at the Downsized DC Foundation that such a holiday would expose the myths that sustain both statism, that is, the love of the state, and militarism. And they then say you can learn their real history by reading, and they link over to an article, Has U.S. Military Power Been a Force for Good or Evil? And I will allow you to answer that question as you see fit, but I'm fairly certain you can tell where I stand on that question. So now let me jump into the Ask Me Anything. I will begin on sort of a lighter note. One of the questions submitted says, which movie will be better, Star Wars The Force Awakens or Warcraft? Now, I'm not a Star Wars person per se. I'm definitely not really a fan of the whole sci-fi genre. There are a couple of sci-fi sort of films or television shows that I like, Firefly being one of them. There's also Ender's Game. If you've never watched Ender's Game, I don't know if you could technically consider that to be sci-fi. That's more like action-adventure sort of thing. But yeah, I'm not really a sci-fi sort of person. And Warcraft is, well, it's based off of a video game. And so, right off the bat, this seems like a very intriguing question, and I'll answer it when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. In 1999, Darryl W. Perry began a search for traditional values, which led him down a path to the ideas of liberty. He tells the story in A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. Of the book, Dr. Brian Sovereign says, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes I think it's crazy, but it's always authentic. Find A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty by Darryl W. Perry on Facebook, read reviews on Amazon, ask for A Rebel's Journey wherever books are sold, or visit arebelsjourney.com. You can support FPP Radio by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. Fans help FPP afford to produce more original content. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month through Patreon and get perks like ad-free versions of FPP Radio News and Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com. That's fans.fppradio.com. In 2115 New England, there are no borders, no states, and no regulations, yet never has a more peaceful and prosperous place existed. But Mr. Drake's security company has seen better days. Faced with the prospect of waning power, Mr. Drake intends to replace the anarchy of New England with a government. But at what cost? And can anyone stop him? Anarchy in New England by Joe Jarvis is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Before I answer the question about which movie do I think will be better, Star Wars The Force Awakens or Warcraft, I want to make sure that I tell you about something that you can do today to help the anti-war movement. Specifically, something you can do today to help antiwar.com. You can buy gold or silver from Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. Today only. Well, you can buy gold and silver from Roberts and Roberts every day of the year. But today only, Armistice Day, November 11th, 2015. Any purchase that you make from Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, all of the profits that they make today are being donated to antiwar.com. And let me tell you about Roberts and Roberts. For nearly 40 years, since 1977, Roberts and Roberts has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount on all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts and Roberts today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760 or visit them online, rrbi.co. And remember, all orders made today, November 11th, 2015, the profits will go to antiwar.com. Antiwar.com is one of the few organizations that I donate money to every month. They are putting out the real news about what's happening around the globe in foreign policy issues. They're telling you the real news about the various wars that are happening around the world. They're giving you news that you will not get from anywhere else. So if you want to help antiwar.com continue doing what they do, then you can either donate directly or you can purchase some gold and silver from Roberts and Roberts Brokerage today, November 11th, 2015. You get something, you get gold, you get silver, they get something, antiwar.com gets the profits. Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, rrbi.co. So jumping back now into the Ask Me Anything. So the question, which movie will be better, Star Wars The Force Awakens or Warcraft? Well, I'm not really a big sci-fi fan, so I'm already sort of dissuaded from the Star Wars film because I've never been a Trekkie. And yes, I know that Star Wars and Star Trek are two totally different things, but I consider everything in like the Star Trek Wars genre to kind of be the same. And like it doesn't interest me. Doesn't interest me at all. Warcraft is more like a fantasy sort of thing. It's based off of the video game The World of Warcraft. And I don't know of any movie that's been based off of a video game that was actually any good. And yes, I know there was the Super Mario Brothers movies that came out back in, the late 80s, early 90s. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. But this Warcraft movie, it's got one of the actors from Vikings. the guy that plays Ragnar Lothbrok, which is the first Viking king, really, the guy that plays him is also in Warcraft. And I really like Vikings, and I like fantasy sort of stuff. I'm probably not going to go pay to see Warcraft. I definitely will not pay to go see Star Wars. But of the two, in my opinion, I would say that Warcraft would probably wind up being the better film. But again, that's just me, and everybody is different. The next question, can libertarians eat meat? If so, why? And now this goes back to the whole thing, and I think I've talked about it previously, to where there are some people saying that libertarians can't eat meat because they're having to kill an animal, and that's an act of aggression, and libertarians are supposed to oppose the use of force, the use of aggression. And yes, libertarians do oppose the initiation of force against other humans. And I can talk about this at length of animal rights. Do animals have rights? Does someone who does not realize they have rights have rights? Where do rights begin? Where do rights end? And that's not necessarily what I want to try to answer, because if you do say that no person has rights unless they realize they have rights, then somewhere near 4 billion out of the 7 billion people on the planet would have no rights because they don't realize that they have rights because oppressive governments or whatnot. You could then even say that a lot of children, they don't realize that they have rights because they've not learned about it yet. So therefore, they don't have rights. You can do whatever. And no, I don't believe that at all. But now in regards to animals, I do think that you should at least have some sort of respect for the animal. And what do I mean by that? So certainly you should not abuse animals. You should, if you have an animal, if you have gone and purchased an animal from a shelter or adopted an animal from a shelter or, adopted an animal just, like there's some wild coyote running around in your yard, and you're like, I'm going to build a fence, and this is now my pet coyote. You should, take care of the animal because you have sort of homesteaded the animal. And I'm using that term specifically because that will get into sort of another question that I'm going to answer here later in the show. But in regards to animals, if you have an animal as a pet or you're raising it for food, you should certainly respect the animal and not abuse the animal. And Mark Edge talks about this on Free Talk Live a good bit because he's a pig farmer. And he says that he has a contract with the pigs, that he will feed the pigs, he will house the pigs, and then once it's time for them to become food, they become food, and both Mark and the pigs are holding up their end of the obligation. And he said that if the pigs could ever tell me I don't want to be food, then he would not turn them into food. But they have no way of sort of espousing, hey, I don't want to be eaten. So he goes ahead and feeds them and makes them all nice and plump and juicy and tender and moist and whatnot. And then when it's time to go to the slaughter, they go to the slaughter, and then they become tasty, tasty bacon. So let me sort of delve one step further. And I've heard people say before, well, you shouldn't kill animals to eat them because they're alive. Yeah, and plants are alive too. Should I not kill them? And, of course, they'll wind up saying, well, that's different because the plants don't have brains. Plants aren't conscious. Plants don't realize what's going... Yeah, and pigs generally don't realize what's going on when they become bacon either. So... again, it goes back to, for me anyway, it goes back to whether or not you're treating the animal with some sort of respect, and or are you, just like maliciously beating the dog or cat or whatever. No, you should not do that. Be kind to your animals until it's time for them to be kind to your belly, and it's oh so tasty. Stay tuned. A couple more questions in just a moment. Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs, with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at weusecoins.com. That's weusecoins.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
So before I get into these last couple of questions, I want to make sure that I let you know of a couple of ways that you can help support this show, as well as all of the other projects that I'm doing. One way you can do that is by joining the Fans program. Fans are friends, allies, and numerous supporters. You can join the Fans program for as little as $3 per month. And what do you get for that $3 per month? Well, you get perks. You get perks like access to commercial-free versions of the podcast. Not just this podcast, not just the Ask Me Anything episode of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, but all of the episodes of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. You get commercial-free access to those. You get commercial-free access to the daily newscast that I do, 7 days per week. You get a commercial-free version of that every day of the week. You also get the FPP News. That's the monthly newspaper. You get that delivered to your doorstep every month. And you also get other perks. You can find out more about those at fans.fppradio.com. And, of course, you can help with just the way you shop. So go to shop.fppradio.com. There are several affiliate links that I have, and any purchase that you make from any of my affiliates definitely helps. So shop.fppradio.com, or more directly, you can join the Fans program, fans.fppradio.com. So let me now jump into the other questions that I have. Is there a coherent theory of property besides homesteading? Now, to answer this question, we really have to answer the parts of the question. So, what is property? Well, most people would describe property as tangible things that you can own, things that you can possess, things that you can improve upon. What is homesteading? Well, homesteading... Well, let me, before I give you what I think it is, let me actually give you the definition of property from, I believe this is Webster's. A thing or things belonging to someone, possessions collectively. That's the definition of property. Now, homesteading, the homestead principle, if you will, is the principle by which one gains ownership of an unowned natural resource by performing an act of original appropriation. And this is pretty much intertwined into all theories of property, except for the wacky Marxist theory that property doesn't exist. So the question was, is there a coherent theory of property besides homesteading? And based on the research that I did, I could not come up with anything, so not that I'm able to find. Now, there are variations on the homesteading principle. There's the labor theory of property, which is sometimes called the labor theory of appropriations, the labor theory of ownership, the labor theory of entitlement, or the principle of first appropriation. All of these are different from the labor theory of value. The labor theory of value, of course, is the Marxist principle that things have value if you put labor into it. But the labor theory of property is that you can become the owner of an unclaimed property by putting labor into it, i.e., homesteading. The labor theory of property has been used to justify the homestead principle, which holds that one may gain whole permanent ownership of an unowned natural resource by performing an act of original appropriation. In his second treatise on government, philosopher John Locke asked by what right an individual can claim to own one part of the world, when according to the Bible, God gave the world to all of humanity in common. He answered that persons own themselves and therefore their labor. When a person works, that labor enters into the object. Thus, the object becomes the property of the person. And now there's also the intangible property, oftentimes called intellectual property. And some people that claim to be libertarians will support the concept of intellectual property, while others do not. And most people that love the government, they absolutely love the concept of intellectual property. And the theory of intellectual property is that someone can own an idea, which means that the words that are coming out of my mouth right now, according to some people, I own these words in the specific order in which I am saying them. No one else ever at any point in the future can ever use these words in the exact same order that I am speaking them right now without somehow violating my property rights. And I absolutely do not buy that at all. I think that ideas cannot be owned. Well, let me back up. An idea can be owned, but as soon as the idea is shared with someone, then the idea can thus not be owned anymore. For to claim ownership of the idea after it has been spoken or written or shared in any way is to claim ownership over the neurons that are firing, the neurons and synapses that are firing in other people's brains when they think of the idea. So, for instance, if I say, do not think of a yellow banana because I have copyrighted the term yellow banana, everybody that then thinks about yellow banana, I am claiming ownership over the neurons and the synapses in their brain while they think about yellow banana. And that is just utter lunacy. So ideas, no. You cannot own an idea any more than you can own a particular molecule of oxygen that's floating around in the air, because it's there. Once it's spoken, it's out, and you can't put it back. It's like the Pandora's box. You can't put things back in Pandora's box. But as far as physical property goes, again, the question was, is there a coherent theory on property besides homesteading? And the answer is not that I'm able to find, but there are several variations on the homesteading principle. The final question this week is, what is the difference between Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz? Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, both a couple of Republican senators that are vying for the Republican presidential nomination. And, well, I found a website called InsideGov.com, and they allow you to compare presidential candidates. And, well, based on what I'm seeing here, really the primary difference is that one's from Texas and one's from, or rather one is a senator from Texas, the other is a senator from Florida. They pretty much support the same stuff, and where I disagree with one, I disagree with both. And I'll post the link to this in the show notes. You can peruse it at your leisure and see just how awful they both are. Don't forget, every Wednesday I answer your questions. Send those to me, AMA@FPPradio.com.